Hi, I'm Mitra. I do DIY design for St. Vincent de Paul of Lane County. We are committed to discovering purpose and value in resources some perceive as waste. Today I'm going to show you how to make headbands out of unwanted, shrunken, and damaged sweaters. The supplies you'll need today are the sweaters, of course, scissors, chalk, pins, a measuring tape, needle and thread, or sewing machine. And these are the styles we'll make today. The first headband I'll show you how to make is a basic headband. You can add your own embellishments. You can add a flower, which I'll have videos to show you how to make as well, or buttons, or bows, or whatever you like. Every sweater has a couple of different textures to it. Usually around the waistband or the cuffs and the neckline, you have a ribbed section. That allows for more stretch. And then the body of the sweater is constructed of a smoother section. The best part I find for headbands is the rib section. So find a sweater that has the right width. For the basic headband, I'm just going to cut the rib section out of the sweater along the line where it segues into the body of the sweater. Once you have this section cut out, the next thing you need to do is measure it to fit it to your head. You can measure your head with a measuring tape if you'd like, and then measure the sweater and mark it at the right size, or you can just wrap it around your head and mark it or pin it at the size you prefer. Make sure it's not too tight or too loose. It will usually stretch out a little bit after wearing, so I suggest going a little on the tighter side. Once you have it measured to the right size, then you can just cut it down. And there you go. Once you have your headband cut to the right length, you want to invert it so any seams are on the outside when you pin it. Pin the two ends together. You'll be sewing along this line, whether you're using a sewing machine or a needle and thread. If you're using a needle and thread, I suggest you anchor your stitch through sewing 3 tiny stitches, especially with a knit. The reason for that is if you tie a knot, it will pull through on a knit fabric. If you're sewing with a sewing machine, being that this stitch doesn't require any stretch along here, you can sew with a straight stitch. So I'm going to do that now. Once you've sewn this line, you can invert your headband and your basic headband is finished. Feel free to embellish it with whatever you like. You may want to embellish it over the seam if you prefer, or anywhere that suits you. The second headband I'll show you today is called the twist. For the twist, I think it looks really good when you use 2 different color sweater pieces. So I've selected these 2 today. And again, I'm going to use the ribbed bottom section of the sweater. There's a natural line to keep the distance between each edge even, and it unravels less when you cut along this line. So go ahead and cut out 2 sections of equal width for this headband. So once you've cut out your 2 sections of sweater that you'd like to use, next we're going to measure them to make sure they go around your head. So you can wrap them around your head, or you can measure your head and make sure the piece of sweater you're going to use is the same length. But because every piece of sweater has a different stretch, I prefer to wrap it around my head. So we want each piece to wrap around your head comfortably. And when you mark it, you're going to actually want to cut it a little bit out from that set point. And I'll show you why. So we have this one. And this one. And when you do this, make sure it's not too tight or too loose. A sweater will tend to stretch out as you wear it, so you might want to make it a little tighter than looser. So once you have your two sections measured the right length, we're going to cut a little bit, maybe a ½ inch out from that point. And the reason for that is you want to allow for room for this actual twist to take place. So I'm going to go ahead and do that with these two. And then you can go ahead and unpin them. We're going to arrange them in kind of a plus sign pattern. The bottom piece you want to gather together like this, and the top as well. And that's what creates your twist. Take the two ends and pin them together. And you will sew along this line. Now if you're sewing with a needle and thread, I suggest you anchor the stitch going through it several times in a small place as opposed to a knot. Knots pull through knit fabric. If you're going to use a sewing machine, go ahead and use a So once you've sewn the seam, flip it over, and there you have your twist headband. The next headband I'm going to show you how to make is called the bow. I love this one because it looks very 30s retro. So what you'll need for this one, you can either use two different sections of the same sweater for the textural difference, or even two different colors of sweater. For the one I'm going to show you, I'm going to use two different colors. So first I have this black chenille sweater. Now one thing about chenille is it does unravel easily. If you're worried about unraveling, you're welcome to do a zigzag stitch along this point before you even cut. And as long as that part is just into the rib section, it will keep the sweater from unraveling. So now that I've cut out the bottom section of the sweater, I also cut out a small section of the bottom of this sweater to use for the middle of the bow. Next, you're going to measure it around your head. Now for this project, you really do need to measure it around your head. So I'm going to wrap this around my head right here and pin it at a comfortable spot. Make sure it's not too tight or too loose. And remember that these will stretch out after wear, so you might want to do a little bit on the tighter side. So once you've done this, you want to sew along this line where you've pinned. Just one straight stitch across here. If you're using a needle and thread, anchor it with several stitches in the same place instead of a knot. If you're using a sewing machine, use a straight stitch. The next thing you're going to do, you're going to lay this headband out like this. So you have this loop in the middle. This is what's going to be your bow. You want to pin the edges of this down to the headband. Then you can do a straight or zigzag stitch along each side. Make sure not to sew your headband together. Now that you've done this, you're going to buckle the middle of your bow like that, and that's where you're going to put your centerpiece. And this piece you may want to hand sew. So using our anchor stitch, go 3 times in the same spot. And I think it's a good idea to not just sew around the centerpiece, but anchor it into the actual bow so it doesn't become off center as you wear it. Make sure if you're cutting off any excess fabric that you don't cut it too close to where you've stitched, just because sweaters do have a tendency to unravel. So leave a little seam allowance, maybe a 1/2 inch. And when you're done sewing, anchor it in again with the 3 stitches in the same place. And I'm going to cut with 1/2 inch seam allowance there. If you want, you can invert this so this part is on the inside, or tack it down so that it's flat and more comfortable to wear. So this is our final sweater headband. It's going to look like this. And again, feel free to play around with different textures, colors, fabrics, different sweaters with this one. It looks really cute to have a different color in the middle. The final headband I'll show you how to make is called the vine. I would suggest to use shrunken sweaters for this one because there are a lot of raw edges and shrunken sweaters won't unravel. So I've already cut out one section for this. It just needs to be the width of your choice. But you do want to make sure both sections are the same width. So I'm going to take the section I've already cut out and lay it on top of this other sweater I've chosen to use and roll or cut it across. You can also use scissors for this. Once you have your 2 sections, you want to lay them out flat like this. Usually you should cut along a seam because that's just a lump on a headband. Okay. And you want to decide what distance you want each of these little vine sections to be. So on this one, they're about 2.5 inches apart. So if you take your chalk and measure about every 2.5 inches on one sweater, make a small mark like that in the middle. The mark can be maybe 3/4 of an inch wide. Now when you do the other piece, you want these sections to be intermittent to these because they're going to loop through each other like this. So what you'll do is you'll pin them together at the end. And you're going to start the first section right in between the 2 here. So the first section on this will be about here. And then you're going to measure every 2.5 inches. Now do keep in mind, this sweater on the bottom stretches a little less than this one on the top. So we may want to do actually every 2 inches or just by 1/4 inch. I'm going to go ahead and mark these every 2.25 inches on the top. It's best if you can find 2 sweaters that are about the same stretchiness and also the same thickness. I'm going to go ahead and cut the excess of that off. Okay. I'm going to unpin this because for this one we want to start with this one on top because this one will thread up through that one first. So the next thing you want to do is go along these marks and cut about 1/3 of the way across the piece of sweater, everywhere you've marked. You're going to do the same for the other piece. So now that we've cut these slits incrementally, we're going to go ahead and sew. So you want the first closest hole, that one on top. We're going to sew these two ends together. You can use a needle and thread or sewing machine straight stitch. And again, with a needle and thread, make sure you anchor your first and last stitch with 3 small stitches instead of a knot. So you want to thread your underpiece through the first hole in your upper piece, like this. And then, again, your underpiece through the upper piece. And continue in this manner all the way down. So when you're finished threading it through, it's basically going to look like this. And making sure that the size is correct on the head, you can pin it. This one ended up a little long, but that's okay, because you never know how the threading process, what size it's going to end up producing. So I'm going to pin it in the back like this, and go ahead and cut the excess off. And then I'm just going to go ahead and stitch that down. So what you're left with is the vine headband, and I think these look really great. I hope you enjoyed our project today, making headbands out of recycled sweaters. Just remember, when it comes to style and artistic self-expression, don't wait for others to do it. Do it yourself.